sounds smoky, but it's not. And it was during the period of the Allies fighting against Hitler, and the British were giving, it's called Lend-Lease, I think, to the Russians to support them with materials. And the issue was the Russians asked for condoms, which they felt was important for the morale of the soldiers themselves. And the British said, what size would you like? And the Russians said, 15 inches. And Churchill said, okay, stamp it medium. So this is stamp it medium. I wonder what it would have been like. I was invited to a lunch with the Chandeliers. That's a familiar name. I'm not quite sure. It's not South African. And then I remembered Kenya. 15 of the most remarkable months of my life, and my life hasn't been unremarkable. So it's competing with quite astonishing episodes. Was spent as a member of the Kenya Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board. And it was established under the Constitution to investigate the fitness of the sitting judges to carry on sitting. Now, I've spent a lot of my life fighting for the independence of judges, and they can't be removed, they can't be threatened. But here, the whole thing was turned upside down. I was one of 3 Commonwealth judges, 3 Kenyan lawyers, 3 Kenyan non-lawyers, and we had to question every single sitting judge. At the time the new constitution came into force a few years ago, to see and determine if they were suitable to carry on as a judge. It was very remarkable. And even more remarkable was discovering the background. And the background was really the tragedy of the Kenyan elections, I think it was in 2010, where people said, we saw the elections being stolen. We saw on television the chief electoral officer called for the count from Nairobi, and the person said was it the Kibaki?
Kibaki.
I'm already forgetting her. Who was actually chosen as the president. 544,390, Odinga 494,000. And the electoral officer stood up and said, those weren't the figures I sent in. So they saw the election being stolen on television. And Kibaki was appointed very quickly that evening, not to a normal public kind of ceremony, sworn in very quickly. Everything was very kind of shady. And it was the Chief Justice who did the swearing in. So why didn't you go to court? You had slam dunk evidence. And the answer was, it's a waste of time. The judges are totally in the pocket of the executive. They either phone and get directions, or there's an understanding. It's not even necessary to spend time on the phone call. They know which side their bread is being buttered, and they just twist the law. And so it's a total waste of time to go to the courts. And what do you do if you can't go to the courts? You get out your machetes, your guns, you kill. And 1,000 people were killed, 500,000 were displaced. It was a great tragedy. Out of the tragedy came the new constitution. And the new constitution has established a new Supreme Court, and it's also established new values. And it also requires that the judges not rely on technicalities in the way they've been doing before to frustrate justice. And the Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board is set up. And amongst the cases that we heard, one of the most flagrant was, and tell me if I'm wrong, the Chanderia case, where it turned out that one of the judges hearing an important appeal brought by the Chanderia family was bribed, and there was clear proof of the bribe. And the family went to court and said, this decision was given against us. by a judge, and we've got proof that the bribe was paid, and we want the decision set aside. And the Court of Appeal said, no, what's done is done, what passed is passed, you can't unsettle the law. It was a shocking decision. I think any jurisdiction I know in the world, you're very reluctant to reopen a case years afterwards, but if you can establish fraud, and fraud, not only fraud in the evidence, but fraud by the judge himself, come on, you know, it's very easy. So some of the judges who were a party to that smothering of the Chandelier case, and we asked them to explain what happened, and if they'd said, you know, I look back, it's shameful. We were operating in those circumstances, we were under pressure. You might have said, okay, you just went along with the flow, but they blustered, they tried to justify, to indicate that even to this day they don't get it, that they're not suitable to sit. So I was quite taken at the idea of actually meeting members of the family, because I don't think people, maybe somebody did come to bring evidence to us, but the facts weren't even in dispute. Happily for Kenya, from my point of view, the new Supreme Court has been doing very, very well. And it shows the difference that an honest judiciary can make in a country. The Chief Justice, his name is Willie Matunga, he stood against the doyen of the old guard, very experienced, the first black African magistrate in the late colonial period in Kenya, worked his way up, very clever, astute, but he bought into that whole system, and he'd given it a gloss of legitimacy, twisting the law, manipulating it in ways that were quite unacceptable. It's really hard. I've been a judge on the Court of Appeal, Constitutional Court. We struck down laws adopted by Nelson Mandela, but we never dismissed anybody. I never had that power that you would have as an ordinary judge all the time, to send someone to jail. I've always restrained power, and now for the first time I'm judging judges and saying you're unfit to carry on. And there's the judge sitting across the table from me, my colleague. We have so much in common. I have so much empathy in a sense for the daily grind of the work of the judge. And yet, when judges behave in that way, it's tragic. I don't know if judges should be held to a higher standard. I think everybody should have high standards. But I can't help feeling, if your judges betray you grossly in that way, the impact on society is enormous. It's worse than a political leader, administrator, even a president, which is bad enough. But the very guardians of a form of integrity, using the Constitution, twisting it around, making words mean things they don't mean. I think that induces a level of cynicism in society that's very profound, and it leads to murder and to civil war. In any event, all of these thoughts come to mind when I think of the Chandeliers. And I think now Willie Matunga, who's now the new Chief Justice, and he had been a law professor, he'd been imprisoned under Moi, and he's now nominated. Parliament has to choose. And I think the first question is, can you tell us, Mr. Matunga, why are you wearing a little ring in your ear? He said, it's my tradition, my culture. They were kind of hinting that maybe he's gay. As if that should be relevant at all. But it's fighting dirty. They didn't want a clean judge. He stood his ground. He didn't apologize for it. He said, that's my appearance, it's my culture. The second argument against him being appointed was that he'd never been a judge. The strongest argument in favor of appointing him was that he'd never been a judge. And it's exciting for me to see now on the African continent, we are very proud of our court in South Africa. But there's another court that is beginning to issue thoughtful, reasoned, modern, progressive jurisprudence. And I might say we all look very much to Canada. When we started with a clean slate in '94, our Bill of Rights being central to our work, we found the Canadian jurisprudence the most helpful of all. And that was particularly the period of Dixon, Bertha Wilson, laying the foundations. Not that we necessarily decided cases in the same way, but it was an approach, a philosophy, the importance of values, of not being hung up on pure technicalities and abstract reasoning, and steeping the decisions of the court in the realities of the society, the country, and the realities of people's hopes. Very powerful support you got from Canada, and it was very thrilling for me to see one of my decisions in South Africa being quoted in the Canadian Supreme Court. So it's a two-way sort of flow. And now I'm hoping to see decisions from Kenya entering that particular circuit. So thank you all very much for inviting me to this tiny little gathering. And I don't know if any of you will be at the talk I'm giving tonight. I'd love to see you there. I was thinking, what can I say today that wouldn't overlap, saving my best for last, and suddenly I thought, Shangri-La family. That's my intro. So this has set me up very well for this evening's event. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the attorneys who made it possible for me to come to Toronto again. It must be about my 10th visit. Each one is interesting. And I think I've met Roy on about 6 of those occasions. And if I remember correctly, when you chaired, I was trying to raise some funds for the artwork of the Constitutional Court. And I ended up auctioning my tie. It was a Paul Clay tie. And we auctioned it, and somebody paid $400 for my tie that went to help the court artworks program in Johannesburg. So thank you, Roy.
I might even, we have a few minutes, I might even ask if anyone has any particular questions of you before I invite you. The meeting seems to have his hand up.
You know, we did get the judgment.
Speaking of art, just for your courts, you're also aware, I imagine, that Roy is a self-taught artist, and a fantastic one of that. So if I may indulge, if Roy would indulge me, I would ask you to suggest to Roy you'd love to put one of his works in the South African courts as well. That's for you and him to take up separately. But go ahead,
Thank you, and I'm glad you brought up the Chandaria case. For those who are not familiar with it, it was one of the big major land case in Kenya. We did get the judgment in our favor, finally, and thank you for, putting light on our case. But the country doesn't have enough money to pay us. So what?
We have another claim coming?